A fella named Math was running a bath, but as he got in it, he heard a wet laugh. Scared from his wits, he covered his bits and spied a fair mermaid rolling in fits. Well, how would she come? Which way had she swum? And giggled she now at the spots on his bum. His confidence shied, he wanted to hide from this beautiful mermaid, swept in on the tide. With fins in her thighs and amber-like eyes and glistening bosom of just the right size. He could not resist, he had to be kissed, but from a guffawing she would not desist. She laughed with a wail, she laughed herself pale. The hair on his toes was tickling her tail. Hello. Hope you forgive me for that one. It always seems necessary to put on a northern accent just to get the math bath rhyme. Otherwise I have to say. A fella called Marth was running a bath, and that's not going to work. Hello. So it's Sunday, it's 4 o'clock. I threw that one at the beginning just to cover me while I'm waiting for people to log on. And I can't necessarily see who is logging on. Only if you send me a little message, then I get to know who's there. I've called this one the Mermaid edition. Although that does kind of imply that I've got a bunch of poems about mermaids for you. And that's only part true, because I've just got the one. Well, apart from that first one. I've got a long narrative poem to read to you today. I want to read to you in 3 parts, written over quite a period, it turns out. And I'll break it up into 3 parts, and also between the second and the third part, I'm going to introduce you to a special guest, my virtual special guest. Well, not really a special guest because they can't be here. I don't know how to get them here to be here with me reading, or even online reading. So I'm going to be reading 2 poems of a friend of mine, and I hope they won't mind. So this one poem I'm going to do, as I say, it's written in 3 parts. It's a story of a sailor and a mermaid, and in many ways it's also about reality against dream, motion against stasis, that sort of thing. Pardon me. And this first part, I began writing it in 2007. So that gives an age to it. I think I revised it majorly in 2013. The second part also was done in 2013, and the third part was finished in 2015. So you can see there's a bit of a way in the writing and the revising. I don't often get a chance to read it, but when I do, I always enjoy it. And I hope you will too. So, let me just get things in order, and then I'll begin. The Sailor and the Mermaid, Part 1. And I know of a sailor who yearned for the sea, for the waves he had crested when lonely and free through tempest and storm in earlier times. He'd stand on the shore, ingrained in the sand, gazed out onto the waves, mounting higher than ever his strength could master, but not so far as his heart would rage. Gazing out long at the monstrous cold that housed his beauty, a mystery glimpsed in the swell of the oceans and dip of the waters beyond his shore, a mermaid surely, sunshine immersed and shimmering, lovely, naked but silent, keeping her secrets. Safe in the harbour, at water's brim, away from the boom of the rolling surf and splintering waves, he followed the tide's advance, retreat, now bringing her closer, now racing away, the nearness of her receding, leaving sharp sand and shingle, rock pools of memory and care cut off. But then, cruel as a miracle, sweeping back to draw his feet from his shoes, to offer embraces, if he would but swim. And I know of a sailor afraid of the sea, of leaving his wife and his children 3 to tempest and storm, but worked on his roof and painted his doors, told tales of his youth to no one, nor his soreness of heart. From the roll of the ocean, the mermaid would come to her lonely rock, a glistening gem in the break of the waves and heaves and the swell, to think of a man she'd glimpsed. Master of his boat, he'd known all the ropes, could tell how to steer, how to storm, had no fear of tempestuous weather, of cold and the currents and the stillness mither of water and wind. She knew no dry land, but this rock, this heel of earth, dwelt there inquiring as to the world of men, daring yet cautious, and longing to walk at times on earth unsalted, unbattered by spray, on greensward and heather, such as drowning men had spoken of. And to stand in the sun, in the light, unrefracted, in full view, not hiding, to be more than a glimpse of beauty. I know of a sailor in love the sea, with the rising and falling, the raging ecstasy of tempest and storm, of turning to wind and bringing about and casting adrift, to be washed up and floating on ocean's bosom. He sent to the mermaid a siren song, longed to lure her to boat and his net, to keep her himself, and cursed himself for it. He tried to be silent. Let the sea do the roaring. Let her be the mermaid, safe in her waters, lonely and free as any can be in the grip of the ocean. Don't risk her, he thought, in nets or on hooks, such unpriceable beauty, her hair so wild, her heart-pleasing smile, her heart. Let it not be hurt on me. Still the creeping current of his own heart tide wailed, "Gods, let her love me!" 2 worlds rolling, hills and waves. One stands forever, the other far longer, and neither might meet except at the shore. And the sailor stood by his ship of wood, wondered whether he'd built it well and nimble enough to fare on the waves and ferry him over the roaring Mel. Behind him in the lee played his children 3, blind to his yearning and the dangers of the sea, and their mother was with them, washing the salt from their clothing and hair, seeing her husband perhaps in his gazing, in the silence of his roar. For what was before him, yet hid by the wave, away on the leagues in a land beyond land, the mystery drawing him to draw her ashore. From a misting of sleep, he awoke to find the moonlight glinting on spit, on the prow, on the forecastle before, and he at the helm, the storm in the sails of his tall ship masted, and far in his wake sat the lumbering shore, the churn of the breakers and surf now distant, while under his bow the rollers were sliced, cresting, breasting, high over, destined to fall to the trough and the rise of the ridge, and the lady sought through tempest or storm, his sails open full to the breath of the heavens, to his own heart swells and a roaring tide. Playful she followed, in awe she amazed at the wood-crafted vessel that mastered the waves, that danced on the water, kissing it, cutting it, playing on currents, not knowing to sink. She swam in the wash, on the surf and the billow, as happy as sunlight, pure gold on the spray, and singing a free melody of the ocean, to dance in the ear and the curls of his hair. Calm on the sea, 'neath the sun's softest breezes, he left the sails flapping, the wheel's gentle turn. He moved to the starboard to stare at the ocean, and met his love's smile as she rode on the depths. His grip offered surety, taken so gently, a kiss of clear water washed over his palm, a rill of sweet dewdrops caressing his fingers. She poured herself into the cup of his hand. Which way would they travel? He gazed at the ripples that ran through her eyes, through the depths of clear water and heaven-blown sighs. She gazed at the strata that chiselled his rock face, the grizzled age of a wind-ridden rage, and she lifted, like water new warmed by the fires, from ocean to air and into his arms. That's part one of The Sailor and the Mermaid. How are we doing? As I say, I can't tell who or if anybody's watching, come to that, unless you give me a wave or something. But hey, Suz is here. Hello. Glad to see you. So we'll continue with part two, which was begun some years later. As a recap, to anybody who came in midway, this is the poem The Sailor and the Mermaid, which begins by telling about an aged, an old sailor looking out at the sea, hankering after something he saw in the depths, a mermaid, reluctant to leave his wife and children, but finding himself suddenly one night aboard his tall-masted ship, sailing out over the waves, and that mermaid following, and finally pouring herself into his hand. And now the story continues in part two. I know of a sailor leaping the sea, rising, riding, catching the ecstasy full in his sails, the winds and the rage, forgetting the cries of his children at play at home in the lee. the joy of his sailing lifting him over the pull and the moil, the prize of the master, his captain's bounty, heart-paid cargo, safely embarked, awkwardly stowed, as he flies over waves, cresting the currents and leaning into the winds. She trembles, the mermaid, at bulkheads, sucking with care the simple splinters caught in her fingers of frayed timbers. New knees knocked by cabin beds, legs unfamiliar, nor sea legs nor land. The scales had fell as she'd taken his hand. In a seesaw of slopes, of to and of fro, she flounders and tumbles on carpets below. She raises a cry, calls to her captain, finds herself silent, as fishes still scream from the trawlerman's net. Putting feet under her, stepping, she's mazed at the doors, and the stairwell's loom is a climb never known, a vertigo pit on the ocean's mell, meeting with upwards and downs such as she'd never found them to be, in the all direction onward of the freedom of the sea. Her vision is sharpened, light is unbent. She's frighted by sound in the shell of her ear, echoing hard, not felt all around, but now unsurrounded. No ripple to tell her captain's direction, no song to be felt in the waves or the sand. She kicks with her arms and finds herself grounded, rolls with the royal and feels herself falling, no billowing cushion of ocean, but only a hit deck of tumble on unsoftened timber to catch her and bruise. At table she sat, her feet curled beneath her, and curtains of cloth netted over her shoulders. The cup in her hand holds what once had been breath. There are fish lain steaming, too hot to be touched. Their scales peel blistered, with eyes blind with scorch. The sailor is eating, offers her biscuit and bread, speaking in thunderstrokes, cracking hard over her head, catches her flinches. A sounding line heavy with lead. I know of a sailor, spent roving the ocean, seeking in reeling through high-riding crests and deep-feeling sorrows, sharing his sorrows with moon and with wind, waking one morrow, expecting to find his sought and won prize, gone with the morning, dried from his eyes. Seeing beside him the signs of her sleeping, the sea change wrought in his bed by her ripples, turbulent sheets swept over the floor, the stranger door left open, surging backwards and forth, staggering blindly he follows to unplot her course. Beneath the mizzen he finds her, dancing, joyful on legs, leaping with laughter into the hold of young gravity's arms, and blowing to air a flock, not a shoal, of wind-catching music and fluttering notes. Then she's rolled by the ocean, thrown by the swell of the cambering deck. A starfish, she clings to the tilting floor, to the rungs of a ladder atop the high deck of the forecastle heaving. Gripped in the sway, she pauses from singing to clutch at hiatus and sureness of feet. He dashes to reach her, to catch her, to hold her. She splashes against him, spinning him round in a whirlpool dance, alive as the foam on a break, as shivered as rills down the spine. With spray from the whale and dolphin's laugh, she drenches his vision, his lips, and the crag of his grimace, his wind-blistered neck. Coatings of barnacles fall from the rocks grown tight on his face, and pearls might be fished from his eyes. She draws him, like shingle and shells, to the swale, to the sea's heavy breast, sings a wish to the wave. And her sigh is for stillness, a haven of rest and staying unmoved. She looks out over the heave all around them, lays a dry hand on his mountainous shoulder, a tide of imploring, and asks her sweet captain to bring her to shore. What can move a mountain? Can drag it raw from the root of the world? What bring a peak from the heavens of its gaze in the skies to its knees in the dunes? What moonist can pull hells to a crest, to break over ground into ripples and to frowns on the deep earth's brow? Hanging old chalk jowls on the clean cliff's slice, what can make it scowl? Make a ragged crag throw itself plummeting to the beach? From the ocean, the land might be a drowned man, drifted up upon itself, lodged on the rock, or else dead and bone dry, or the last movement bled through an emptying vein, the red river's spill. How can anything ever be ever so still? Even the deepest of waters is rolling a swirling dance that gathers the left of the land and everything alters, while highest has waves within waves and in writhing, waves to the sky, to the moon, to the ship sailing by. In the midst of the riot, the brooding land remains fixed in its place, pushing the waters that rain ever down from the swell of its shoulders, spitting the rampaging salt from its mouth. He drags the ship from the sea to the shore, to the threat of the rock, where, thrown on the sky, the mountain's shadow covers the stars. He carries her high from her hammock below, wakes her tenderly, cradles her, bears her like ocean, as unseen as water, as freedom, as time, running out over the sands. He lifts her like sunrise to gleam on the hills, hears silence, suspension, looking up over her tension of ecstasy, light in his hands. He watches the mermaid on point of her breaking, over shore, over rock, over hard pebbled floor, her stepping, her soul never touched, onto glass, onto thorn and the dullness of stone. To be reeling with weight, with the absence of current, sunk in the gravel, with graves on her feet, shadowed by mountains and snatched by the rose, not quite carried by falling, but caught by the lurch, immersing the leagues of her life into sand, sun-drying crystals of salt cross her cheek and hand. Locked in her yearning, unmoving, she gazes green in her vision with blueness of eye embedding to brown. At the stillness so solid, at calm of a kind never caught by the sea. The reel of the world, around which the tumult of dreams must crash in a frantic collision. Held high in his arms, she glistens like diamond, reborn to the earth and clear in her edges. The salt in her blood becomes driftwood and jetsam, Drips from her fingers the last of the sea, the pearlescence now washing out from her eye. The mountain is moved by the stilling of ocean. When turmoil ceases, the end of the seething, the last soft wave on the shore spills over the sand and stops. No gathering ebb, only stops, still, as a breath never taken, as hope never dared. And the sound that remains on the wind on the air is the groan of the mountain left roaring alone, of the fault line, the grinding of stone against stone. The wheel turns sharp in his hand, the keel comes about, the waves hit broad on the side, the lurch comes on them, a blistering motion, but caught on a rise and carried on rolling, the vessel comes gut first, down onto jags, rending the sea beams, stabbed through the middle, unbinding the caulking, bursting on rocks, throwing its splinters to all waves around them, broken the back of the bounding sea steed, snapped upon the ceaseless stillness of land's teeth. And I know of a sailor engulfed by the sea, not quite breathing in water, a flounder of man and a wave avalanching, a killer scree surrendered to ocean, a wilding dance of limbs, of legs and arms at all angles, seeking to open himself like a clam, to scrape bare his belly or disappear quite like the pattering shower of rain into water. His solidity hurls him all over and round to the depths, then to dark, upsetting and upwards and all ways before him, and not knowing which way to sink. There is only a glimmer of fish scale to tell him he is not wild ocean entire. The kiss of a hand on his jutted chin, a pull through the water to calmer currents, the wave of a tail to bring him to shore. That's part 2 of The Sailor and the Mermaid. I'll give you part 3 very shortly. Hiya Kat, how you doing? Good to see you. Now, for these readings, I've been, as best I can, including a special guest. They can't be here. And to be honest, I don't actually know I'm doing this, so I hope they don't mind. But today I'd like to read a couple of poems by a friend from Worcester called Claire Walker. Let's see, you see the book there. This is her book, Collisions. It's not her first book. She's another one. The girl who grew into a crocodile and somewhere between rose and black. And she does write a fair bit about mermaids. So I thought it fit in to read a couple of hers just now as a little interval as well before I give you the third part. So one I'd like to read for hers for you. It's called A Tattooist's Mistake. You ask for a mermaid, so that is what I give you. My needle draws her slender back, arching to surf that nibbles her skin. Hair red and long, floating like crimson seaweed out against water. A pearl ripens in her navel. Her tail sweeps into existence, every scale an emerald jewel. I shade gradual darkness, a swell around her hips. After you leave, you spend the night beachcombing, she supple in the twist of your arm. You return at sunrise, hollow-eyed. Ask me for starfish, sea glass, oysters, the entire spill of an ocean. It starts off as a small thing, grows and grows and grows. And the second one I like to read from this collection of hers called Collision is called Pisces. It was as though babies melted from the basket of my mother's womb, as if water steamed in her stomach, scalded life from existence. She caught many times and easily, each week held tight as odds ebbed until the shipwrecked end. She did not give in to the waves. Then one soft March, I swam against history, made the coast. I learned to breathe out of water, and holding me, so did my mother. That was called Pisces by the lovely Claire Walker from her book Collision, published by Against the Grain. Now, to return to the third and final part of The Sailor and the Mermaid. For a long time I didn't know how the story would go, and that in part accounts for how long it took to write the whole thing. As I say, it began in 2007 and this version was finished in 2015. And there's certain revisions for it too. So to recap, in case you joined midway through, I've been reading this long poem of mine, not quite my longest, but close, called The Sailor and the Mermaid. In the first part, this aged sailor is seen gazing out over the sea, longing to return to it, to pursue this vision of dream that he saw in his youth, the mermaid, but scared to leave his wife and children behind on the shore. Waking one night to find himself already upon his ship out to sea, the mermaid following behind and agreeing to come on board with him. Part 2 sees the mermaid trying to become accustomed to this hard knocks life of the ship and the unbalanced nature of it, whilst the sailor comes to terms with having this thing that he dreamed of, this person he dreamed of, there in his arms. And it's only when she asks to be brought to shore that he begins to feel any kind of trouble about it. It seems she yearns for the stillness and solidity of the land that she's been told about by drowning sailors. And then, for whatever reason, the sailor turns his ship to the wind and runs it aground, throws them both back to the waters, and his last memory is of the flash of a fish's tail and a gentle hand cupped around his chin to draw him safely back to shore. And that's where The Sailor and the Mermaid, Part 3, continues from. And I know of a sailor, I know of a sailor, I know of a sailor returned by the sea, scoured, the drag of the sand on his skin, the lifting of legs by the truculent wave, drawing him out to the wash, pushing him back to the land, swinging from side into side, as numb as the water that slides from his back or the rock that rides in his heart. He is spread on the beach, in the brine and the sand, crustaceans clamping his lip and his tongue. As welcome as salt is the breath in his mouth. He is lying as deep in the sand as in air, as a stone he lies, with a surge pulling back to relinquish its hold, dragging the soak from his rags, leaving him gripped by the shore. The movement to stand is as slow as an oak mountain's stretch. His head remains bowed to the sand, his legs dig beneath, find knees, then feet, then lift the whole weight into giddy dismay and retreat. Stillness just offers imbalance to limbs set for motion. The belly still slaps to the sides, but towering now in the sway of his crow's nest head, he grapples the shore, land ho! And placing his soul on the slope, on the strand, it is he who tilts, not the sea or the sky. Vision goes reeling as stars used to do on the cambering deep. He sinks to the ground as the drop of a wave, left with no thing to lift him but self. Relaunched, he throws limbs to each side like a fierce rack of oars to distance his hulk from the rock, to keep his keel even beneath. At his feet, the sand, once stained by the sea, lies pallid and drained by a lowering tide, pretending virginity. Smooth and untouched, with his step it groans as he places his weight and breaks into cracks, throws each step backward, tugged into gravity's constant ebb. But up where the wave cannot reach, he sees the trace of another, of footsteps far smaller than his and unbooted, walking unsteady, unused it may be to unclenching sea, walking across the sand to the road. She, it must be, who rose from the deep with a glitter of scale and a cradling hand, to draw him undrowned from the water, to carry him back to the shore. Caught in a stream unfurled, he follows once more. The way from the sea is hard and ungiving, still, rolling still across a landlocked crest, with a drop sharp and fell from a sea-bitten down. The high rocks refuse to be whipped by the gale, won't fall into dips till 100,000th tide has been turned, shown its twice-faced back. So the Moor, high-browed, gazes down at the sea. On a track made sunken by the tread of sheep, he drops to a trough, rises up across a ridge to be hit by the wind, feels the scream of the sail bent and cracking of his own bowed back. But the grip of the road keeps his heel ingrained, and the pull of the earth is to paths trod before, to the heights overlooking the harbouring shore, to the cobs, to the streets, to the homes of the town. Leaves him there to look down at a much-charted land, nothing altered but peeling, all the work of his hand, sees the roof, sees the door, sees the meadow once more, sees the net towers looming. and the ferryman's store. Sees the harbour beyond, arms sunken with stone, sees the house, sees his children alive and his wife at the window, salt-sanded, hair-crusted, alone. Unseen, uncaught. In the trawlerman's tower, he moors himself under the nets, left to dry from their high hooks hanging, and dropping himself into full depths of shadow. Exhausted, his dreams have a stillness unknown, never thought on in thought, never felt in a heart beating this side of dying. But he wakes with the dawn, leaking sun through the timbers, with dust motes floating in the slices of light. Further into shadow, he gathers his wreckage, into darkness made deeper by the brightness of day, when his sight is caught by the glint of some mystery. Sparks in the dark draw his gaze like a hook to a shimmer left hanging from the deep-set beam. Dust cannot cover it, or drown out the colours. Darkness cannot bury it, nor cloud the spark. A lightness of scale, iridescent in its slumber, the tail of a mermaid, draped slightly over bark. And I know of a sailor, with heart made of oak, all broken to splinters and wrecked on the sea, stood speared by a rising wave of memory. Abroad on the land, on the grit-spitting land, on the dust and the thorn, on the pull of the ground and the grind of the dirt, a mermaid walks or stumbles or falls, the water within, but drying, but dying, but forced into crying, wet lines from our eyes for a taste of the sea. A dream of the sea now drawn from the sea to crack its pebble-smooth skin into shards, wave-combed hair now lost from its dance, undrenched, dragged down like kale weather-vaned. Lost is the freedom to swim all directions, shackled to the freedom to fall, or to walk new ruts into road, no currents, only talk. High-flung songs dragged back on a sad tide, whip cracks sharp on a mutineer's back. Tide after tide would come, had come, where once had been restless, endless swirl of eternal ocean. Salt is released from the water and breaks into grain upon grain, tide and time, and sand and dust and falling grime, thick skin thinned out into loose weave net, hair bleached grey, blood pooled into veins, and the weight on legs and the weight of legs, oxbow spined and the high breast tumbling, teeth worn yellow long, clear vision misted, tight wound torn by the carrying and stretching, blood on the bed, on the thigh, and, in the end, drying. The bay had been empty so long he'd forgotten all the tempests and storms of an earlier time. The wind-driven voyage and the following laughter, the flash bluing green and the shy-away smile, diamond drops that had pooled in his hand and had never poured out, streams spilled over his lips and his chin in a glimmering kiss, curls that ran fully free in his fingers. This mermaid, this being of water, this giver of son and of daughter, had brought herself and her ocean to land, walked first steps from eternity into the sand, into age, into sorrow and death's certainty. Seeing her netted in time, and now knowing why he'd wrecked the ship, he could not bear to watch her die. question at the door, suspicious ajar. Light from the outside steps in, soft steps, soon eclipsed by a shade as she enters the long-locked tower and looks at the nets draping down. The dust they have caught over so many moons has been tampered with, signs of a stranger. Her eyes have grown tired of light, and her ears, though tied to the cries of her children, are still not accustomed to air, have silted up quite. Dry shadow all around, not feeling his heat, nor hearing his heart. The fear of a thief bitten back makes her start with soft, careful steps on the faraway ground to walk to the hiding place never yet found. Relief and regret, equal matched, leave no trace. But its beams light the weather lines frowned on her face, taking up that she had forsook from the sea, not the mermaid, but the mother of his children 3, clasping her fish's tail, a long-harboured dream. I was once a mermaid too, and you loved me. That's The Sailor and the Mermaid, parts 1, 2 and 3. Not often performed in its entirety, most often it's part 1 alone. That gets an airing. So it's lovely to be able to do all 3 together. So thank you very much for joining me and being with me to listen. If you want to hear it again, or if you came in midway, the video will be on the timeline shortly. So you can dodge back to the start if you want to. All that's left to do, well, to thank you again, to thank Claire Walker for the poems I read of hers, and to reprise this one that I read right at the beginning, before any of you had a chance to tune in and listen. I'll be back again day after tomorrow, all being well, and I hope you are all being well. I'll speak to you soon. Math and the Mermaid. A fella named Math was running a bath, but as he got in it, he heard a wet laugh. Scared from his wits, he covered his bits and spied a fair mermaid, rolling in fits. But how had she come? Which way had she swum? And sniggered she now at the spots on his bum? His confidence shied, he wanted to hide from this beautiful mermaid, swept in on the tide. With fins in her thighs and amber-like eyes and glistening bosom of just the right size, oh, he could not resist, he had to be kissed. But from her guffawing she would not desist. She laughed with a wail, she laughed herself pale. The hair on his toes was tickling her tail.